It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And this Wellness Wednesday, we're talking what I've learned from the trans people in my lives. I've lived a few lives now. But yeah, Trans Day of Visibility is March 31st. That's a Sunday. So we're doing a little group hangout on the Discord server. Not, oh, trans people will get a chance to speak. We're just going to hang out and be people. And to me, that was the best way to handle it in my community. But Akila asked me if I was going to do anything in content. And obviously the best thing I can do is refer people to her content because it is first person. She is a trans woman and it's her experience. And this is where we get into that thorny thing of we do have to actively stand up for and beside the trans people in our lives, all people in our lives, without speaking for them or telling them their experience. And it can be challenging to thread that needle sometimes. So I took notes this time so I don't ramble too much, and some of the wording I wanted to be careful with. So if you like this content, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Yes, all the work I do is trans friendly, and that's, I've learned a lot that way. TLDR, trans people are people, which means they're individuals, and too much of the activism strips that out. And more on that in a bit. The first thing I've learned, this is a big thing, it comes up a lot, that trans men, they're getting left out of the conversation. They're getting left out of the public consciousness. They're being erased. And if they're not being erased, they're being treated like victims of patriarchy by well-meaning gender criticals. And the problem with that is it's emasculating. No, they're not victims. They owned who they are. It's a really tough road for trans people. One of the really infuriating things for me is this narrative that you just show up and a doctor gives you hormones and Bob's your uncle. And I do not know one person who has had remotely that experience. The majority of the people I know went through hell to get approval. And it's a traumatizing process. Even if you get a supportive medical team, there are a ton of tests they have to do before they put you on the medications, not just because of dosage, but they have to check for thyroid issues and a whole bunch. You have to see an endocrinologist. And I don't know what alternate reality people live on regarding, oh, you just show up and get hormones. Now, okay, in the US, it's for-profit medicine. So I'm sure there are doctors exploiting some people's desperation that way. But I know quite a few trans people. I have not heard a single one of them say it was easy. But for trans guys, it's worse than that. A lot of their needs are made secondary, not just to trans women, but also non-binary people. And I'll get to more of that in the second point. But they're told, especially in very left-wing organizations, oh, you have privilege now because you're a man. I made that joke in Boss Fight with Zarkazan and Solomon, but it is, I found that out because trans guys have told me, yeah, I've been told that. I'm like, oh my God, that was one of those. Think of a really stupid thing a cartoonish leftist would say and put that in the script, and unfortunately it really happens. Does it happen all the time? No. Does it happen? Yeah. And we need a big issue is that a lot of trans dudes are going stealth. They're not out at work. They're sometimes not out to their friends because they pass very well. So if they start going, hold up, I'm trans, well, that creates a real shift where now people know, and now people stop treating them like just one of the guys. And that causes a whole shit ton of things. And to hear some of these stories, it's really, really frustrating. Sorry, I needed coffee. And that brings on to the other point. There's a lot of these talking points that do this to be trans friendly. The problem is all trans people don't want the same things. And, you know, I have noticed that especially with recent accommodations in Canada for trans people. A lot of government offices are now adopting what they believe to be trans-friendly policies. Not just in Canada. I've heard from people all over the world about this stuff that mean well, but, you know, run campaigns saying men can get pregnant and putting tampons in the men's room. And I told one cis guy that I talked to, they're like, what is that? I'm like, steal them for your wife and girlfriends of your girl, you know, your girlfriend, your daughters or something like that if they use them, because that shit's expensive. And I mean, yeah, free menstrual care. It's more an issue in schools. To me, that's trying to look like they're doing something. Some people may appreciate that, but the problem is that, you know, I've heard from trans guys, the men can get pregnant, the tampons in the men's room. It triggers their gender dysphoria. And this is what makes this whole thing so challenging, because individual needs are just that, individual. And what can make one person feel accepted can make another person feel awful. And I know big corporations hate talking to their employees and doing different things to accommodate different people. But when we really get to the nuts and bolts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, yeah, that's what it's about. It's recognizing the individuality in every person. And sometimes, you know, someone having a different frame doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means it's different. And hey, let's find a way to make everybody feel wanted and appreciated and like coming to work. And a lot of trans guys suppress their periods. And, you know, seeing tampons there, it's like kind of, I won't speak for them saying they feel called out, but it's sort of like, that's what I'm trying not to think about. Gee, thanks. It's one of those well-meaning things where then the trans person in question has to know whether they want to be the human resources problem mentioning that this is an issue, instead of human resources being proactive and going, hey, this is the mandate that's come down. What do you think about this? And this is, you know, this is an example of something that's very, I want to believe it's well-meaning. It does seem very performative to me, having products like that in a more neutral place where people can just kind of grab them and use them if they want. I don't know. I'll stick with well-meaning. Because some of this stuff I know from disability circles, some of it is, look how great we're doing. And it's more to make able-bodied people feel better than actually make a disabled person's life easier. So there's some of that with everything. But yeah, shocker, trans people are individuals. And that brings me to the next point I've heard from trans people for Trans Day of Visibility. They want to just be people. They don't want every communication they have to be charged because they're trans. Like, obviously, nobody does. Imagine, I compare it to me going on social media these days, and it's like, who am I going to see that I like saying, Zionism is genocide this week? But worse, because it's all the time. And I know this war is going to end and we'll all go back to pretending that people didn't say a lot of unfortunate shit. For trans people, it never stops, and it's much worse. And people make stupid jokes, and then they go, oh, well, we're not allowed to joke anymore, and things like that. And it is really... Nobody's wrong there. I see everybody's side. More on that when we get to the activist stuff. But they don't want to be... I mean, I know I get it, where some people I don't associate with anymore would get very, very jumpy regarding gender when I was around. And I was just like, look, be cool. If there's an issue, I will address it, but I'm not going to bite anybody's head off for misgendering Ezra Miller. The non-binary pronouns, everyone messes them up. I mess them up. I mean, if you listen to the unedited version of the interview I did with Poppy and Xena for It's Not Therapy, I apologized to Xena because Xena uses they, them pronouns. I apologized if I ever misgendered them. And then immediately afterward, all right, ladies. And I'm like, I just did it again. It was a laugh. I am making the attempt. That's all people need. And that's not how it's been presented. I know. But the reason that those attempts are so important is I hear from a lot of trans people that they're afraid their friends don't really accept them for who they are, or they don't really believe them. That they think they're crazy or attention seeking or something. This is a really common thing I hear. Even among trans people who are friends with other trans people, that their dysphoria gets minimized by some of the people around them because they don't have the same experience. And this is the challenge, is that everybody's gender dysphoria exists triggered by different things, but also it exists in different degrees of severity. And cognitive behavioral therapy does not stop gender dysphoria. It doesn't. It doesn't stop any of those somatic, those body responses. You can talk yourself through it to be less self-destructive until it ebbs again. But you can't just talk yourself out of these things. And it really is an issue that they think even that people that like them don't think their existence is valid. They think their friends think they're crazy. And that's why doing things like using the pronouns that make them more comfortable. And I don't like the term preferred pronoun. This is something I'm trying to take out of my vocabulary, because I've had trans friends go, it's not a preference, it's who I am. It's what I am. I want you to call me this because this is what I am, and this is a validation that you acknowledge I am who and what I say I am. And when it's put that way, it makes sense. We know that in continuing to call somebody by the wrong name is disrespectful, at the very least lazy or sloppy. It's the same thing with pronouns. Yes, non-binary pronouns are tricky. That's the main reason I don't use them. I'm not even good at it. I do have she, her, they, them on Instagram. Nobody says they, them to me because she, her's easier. And you know what? That's fine. I just put that there as an acknowledgement of this is real for me. And I I don't count myself among transgender people because I do not require social services. I don't require any of that. It's just this is me, and I find it extra funny that the really hard left trans activists call me cisgender when all they have to do is go to my Instagram. It's amusing to me, but it's not the same. And it's a really visceral thing, and it is very real for the people that don't understand it. I want to say yet as well. It comes down to how much what is reasonable accommodation here. And personally, I think it's easier to just call the person what they want to be called. I have really been struggling with one person I don't know personally, but this person uses it pronouns. And I am deeply uncomfortable about that just because I grew up in a majority Black neighborhood. You called somebody it. That was incredibly demeaning. But the people I talk to who know this person, they believe it's respectful to use his pronouns. And we had a really good conversation about both sides, and they were really good seeing my side. I understand what they're saying, and I cannot get over this urge of, because I've had people do that thing of they tell me to call something because I say it's respectful, and then they were trolling, and so they screen cap it and make me seem like a transphobe. And you know, the people I was talking to, they're like, yeah, that's shitty. I get why you're worried about that. So whenever I can, I just use the person's name. I break down and use it when I really need to, but it does make me uncomfortable. And that's the thing about getting along with people who are different from you. All of us have to be a little bit uncomfortable so that no one's completely uncomfortable. And it's really simple that way. If you don't trust that somebody is coming at you on the pronoun question for authentic reasons, why are you associating with them? Avoid them as much as possible. I find that a bit of a irrational fear response. Irrational does not mean invalid. It's just, if you really don't trust the person, why are you hanging out with them? And that's the thing, that if you don't use these pronouns, these things that let people know you're their friend and you believe them, you are letting them know you don't believe they are who they say they are. And that's a real problem. You can't call yourself their friend, really. There's no trust if you think they're lying. So it's a tough one, and that one's going to take some time, but those have been really interesting conversations fairly recently. And this is where I land at the thing I've been hinting the whole time. The trans people I know don't feel represented by the activist class, the activists that are speaking on behalf of trans people, and in some cases really painting a picture that the trans people I know feel is inaccurate. Like, you know, men can get pregnant is a good thing to say. And yes, if you want to be a gender inclusive clinic, predominantly for non-binary people, have pregnant people instead of pregnant women as your language. I fully support that, in part because I think any language that reminds people that a pregnant person is a person, that a mother is a person, they are not just a nanny robot for their child, they still matter as an individual, their subjectivity matters, all the better. I think this helps everybody by reminding people that once you reproduce, you are still a person. But the problem for trans men is that the idea that they can get pregnant is sickening and terrifying. And so the pregnant people language, okay, that's inclusive to non-binary people, and the few trans men with body dysphoria minor enough that, you know, if they want kids, this is how it's got to be done. They're very, very rare. And I think that the men can get pregnant thing, I mean, I feel bad even repeating that just because I know it does aggravate or trigger the dysphoria of people I know. And that's something the activists pushed more than the vast majority of trans people who are just living their lives. There's a lot of disagreement within trans communities, and the advocates and the activists are trying, the advocates are trying to please everybody, and you can't, because the activists are treating everything like a protest slogan, and that isn't how you persuade the people that need to be persuaded. Screaming at them all the time never convinced anybody that they were wrong. I get the talking points documents and the way, you know, organized professional advocacy that lobbies governments and things like that teaches you to, you know, structure your arguments. Is we all want, you know, for instance, all kids to feel like they belong and participate in sports. And, you know, when a kid is 13, we're not talking about scholarships here. Nobody is losing a spot in college. They just want to play on a team as their complete selves. If it's a non-competitive league, like, let them play. Appealing to a common core value of everybody wants to feel included. That's the way it's done. Instead of, if you don't let my daughter play sports, you're transphobic. The minute you make an accusation of someone, you're losing them. And then some people can get very active, and then they go out of their way to go, I'm not phobic, you're just wrong, it's just science, and we get into this ridiculous fight. And if you're somebody who enjoys sports and is transgender, it's a really tough debate right now. I'm not an athlete, to put it lightly. I used to play basketball, but in seventh grade, we had seventh or eighth grade, I don't remember anymore. We had co-ed basketball with the boys. And at that age, girls are taller than the boys. It was a bloodbath. They took it away because the girls were too aggressive. So that's my frame on mixed gender sports. When you go to camp in this area, it's mixed gender sports. We don't have that segregation at that age level. So I have a hard time understanding that argument, but I do know that in things like that, it's not a question of good and bad. It's inclusion, which is good, it's a virtue, but then fairness, which is also a virtue. And unless we compete it, unless we debate it as a right versus right thing instead of a right versus wrong thing, we're never going to build consensus because somebody's going to feel demonized. And with the Karening from parents right now, oh God, it's awful. We need to take the temperature down and I think take an approach more like the Canadian women's suffrage movement did, where it was light. We used humor. We made it not scary. We're like, look, let's just try it. Okay? Let's try it. Instead of the unstoppable force meets a movable object thing. Because what I've heard from the trans people I know, and the spectrum of political opinion in the trans people I know ranges from very, very left to kind of libertarian more than right wing, but certainly not lefty. But none of them like the activists. Even the lefties, even the people more to the left than me, they don't like the activism. They think it's hypocritical. And anybody, further to the center than me thinks it's extreme and not inclusive. And if activism, as Akila says, activism has to work for the group they're doing activism for. The group can't work for the activists. And right now, the activists are acting like, the true Scotsman or the religious zealot of, we're right because we're making all these extreme things and we're the only ones who really care because we're asking for all these radical things. Radical, war, like all the communist language. And it's like, nah, it's never worked. And the activism is letting trans people down and non-binary people down. And that's the last point. The trans people I know are they are all perfectionists in their own way. They are all walking around with a lot of stuff really bottled up because they are so afraid of failing the people around them. They're so afraid of letting people down. And so they don't talk about the tougher stuff. They don't talk about the botched surgeries. They don't talk about the regrets they do have. Not regretting transitioning. They still think that was the right thing for them to do. But just that it was so hard. The grief they have to process, the pain. It's a really, really difficult process. And they don't want to complain because the minute you say things aren't sunshine and roses, well, you get lumped in with the detransitioners, right? And I do think a handful of detransitioners doesn't invalidate anything, because if you look at surgery outcomes for gender affirming surgeries, it's the rate of regret is so much lower than other types of surgeries. I mean, I had knee surgery. It only partially fixed the problem. Do I kind of regret having the surgery? Depends on the day, right? Because it's like, all right, I have to consciously remind myself it was worse before the surgery, but the physio, the recovery, because there were complications, was so hard. Some days I do wish I hadn't done it. A lot of cisgender women who get breast implants end up taking them out because, various reasons. Is that detransitioning? See, we don't actually do science here. We don't balance the cisgender cosmetic procedures with transgender or gender affirming procedures, because if a woman gets a surgery, a cisgender woman gets a surgery to be prettier, that is a gender affirming surgery. If a man gets hair plugs, that is a gender affirming procedure. It's trying to be closer to the masculine or feminine ideal. And my thought personally is that, it's hard to really argue that adults should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies, which is why it's all kids in bathrooms right now. But it's gotten so loud that trans people don't have the option of opting out of being an advocate, of being an activist. And that's not fair. That needs to be opt-in. People can't walk around going, please ask me about being trans today. Some days they just want to be a person. They don't want to think about it too hard. They're feeling particularly raw, and it's not the best day for that. And they should have that. Everybody should have that. Everybody has the right to just be a person and not constantly justify their existence every time they breathe. And if you don't think that that's how trans people feel today, talk to one respectfully. Not what you determine to be respectful, what they determine to be respectful. If I could change one thing about the way people talk to each other, is something that a guy named Jeff Pereira, who was on It's Not Therapy talking about men's issues, talked about. That if your intention is to be polite, if your intention is not to hurt or not to offend, the best way you can communicate that intention is by making your actions behaving in accordance with that intention. So if you don't intend to hurt someone and you see them getting upset, stop, find out why, and maybe pull back. If the other person who you think you're being extremely respectful to is seeming agitated and they say, well, I feel disrespected, I have been nothing but polite, you just seem like an asshole. And there's things I don't know. I'm still learning. I'm still learning about everything. I'm never going to understand what it means to be a woman, which is why people, define womanhood. It's like, to me right now, being a woman means you're old, useless, and ugly the minute you have a 4 or higher at the beginning of your age. That's what being a woman is. No, that's not the definition. Okay, person who has never lived as a woman a day in their fucking life. Gender is more than just anatomy. It is more than chromosomes. They are social categories. They are boxes we all are forced into. And if I could change one thing, it's everybody's a little less certain that they are truly coming across as polite, that they are truthfully coming across as respectful. If you really think someone is messing with you, just end the conversation. And I hope that by next year, we've turned this around and things are much better on this point. Because as much as none of my trans friends are my trans friends, well, that's not true. I know some of them that do struggle with suicidal ideation. But a lot of them, it's like, I know they're going to be here next year, knock wood. But I just wish there were more good days and fewer bad days connected to the noise surrounding their gender identity. They're very good people, and I feel honored to know every single one of them. And I do see the moments where it may not be directly about them being trans, but they are treated as less believable or less stable or less reliable in terms of their description of events because they own that they're transgender. And that's what I want to help reduce personally. Because this is the stuff I've learned. And I wish everybody had the opportunities I did to grow as a person by knowing interesting, dynamic people in this way. I also understand that trans people are very, very guarded about who they open up to because of the, finding out this friend of theirs doesn't actually believe them. And that's, as you can imagine, soul destroying. So that's my little contribution to Trans Day of Visibility. Please, on Sunday, check in with the trans and non-binary people in your life. Let them know they're appreciated. Give them some positive visibility instead of all the negative visibility they've been getting. And if you want to, some of the people who do benefit from the Patreon one-on-one peer support program are transgender. So coffee.com/Leanna K is that Patreon help support these videos. Both give you access to our Discord that we are doing a chat on Sunday about just hanging out, just being people, just, hey, I see you as an individual, not a collection of identity parts. So thanks for watching and be well.